In the Jewish tradition, there is a custom to not mix meat with dairy. They don't eat meat with milk products. They don't eat chicken parmesan, they don't eat cheeseburger. They don't have anything that combines meat product with milk, dairy product. But why? Where does that tradition comes from? Where does that custom begins? Is it an actual commandment from the Lord, the God of Israel, Adonai, to not mix meat with dairy? Well, some might say yes, but they would be basing their entire interpretation on one verse that shows up 3 times in the Torah, which is, as you probably know, do not boil a kid in its mother's milk, a young animal in its mother's milk. Now, in this message, I really want to dive deep and explore those verses to really put it together in the proper context to see the proper understanding of such commandment. Does it actually talk about meat and dairy? Let's examine the evidence and see for ourselves. Remember that the Word of God was not given in verses and chapters, and it was given as a scroll, as a fluent reading, something that you read throughout, not verse by verse. So if you want to understand it, you really have to read in context. You don't just take one verse and quote it, as many Christians do. You go to church, they put up one verse on the screen and preach for 2 hours on one verse. But you have no idea what the context behind that verse. They do it so often, and well, where did they learn it from if not from the Jews? It's their book, it's a Jewish book written by Jewish men. So let's really take this to heart, read in the proper context, and see what we can find out about this strange commandment to not cook a kid in its mother's milk. Now, the first place that this commandment shows up is in the book of Exodus, which is called Shemot in the Hebrew language, basically meaning names, because it begins with the names of the sons of Israel. So we are reading in chapter 23, starting at verse 14. That's the beginning of this segment that talks about this particular subject. 3 times a year you are to observe a festival for me. Adonai is speaking. Keep the festival of matzah. For 7 days, as I ordered you, you are to eat matzah, that is unleavened bread, at the time determined in the month of Aviv. For it was in that month that you left Egypt. No one is to appear before me empty-handed. In other words, you better bring a gift. I gave you life, I gave you produce, you better bring me something as a thanks offering. Next, the festival of harvest, the firstfruits of your effort sown in the field. And last, the festival of ingathering at the end of the year, when you gather in from the fields the result of your efforts. So in other words, first is Pesach in the Aviv, the springtime, then the festival of harvest, the first fruit, that is called Shavuot. In the Christian world, they call it Pentecost, 50, because you count up 50 days from Pesach, from the Shabbat of Pesach, 7 full weeks, and then the next day after the 7 weeks, which is always the first day of the week, Sunday, and that is Shavuot. And then the last is Sukkot, the tabernacles, ingathering, at the end of the year. That is usually around the fall. 3 times a year, all your men are to appear before the Lord, Adonai. And then he tells them some more instructions when you do come up. You are not to offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread. So you do not give him anything fermented, nor is the fat of my festival is to remain all night until morning. You have to burn it up in the evening, do not let it sit. You are to bring the best first fruits of your land into the house of Adonai your God. Don't you bring him some second-hand produce. And then he adds this weird commandment, you are not to boil a kid in its mother's milk. Okay. Remember, the Torah was not given to us. Nor, listen to this, was it given to the Jews who returned from exile from Babylon in 530 something BC. This was given a long time ago, 1,000 years before. This was given in the desert to a people who understood what was being said because they were there. They understood the culture. They understood why this was said. Obviously, this was said because this was something that was being done. Think about this. Common sense, right? Why would you tell someone not to do something unless they are doing it and you want them to stop? If it's not even on anyone's conscience, why would they do it? So, the second passage would be in Exodus 34. Same exact thing. Starting in verse 22. Observe the festival of Shavuot with the first gathered produce of the wheat harvest, and the festival of ingathering at the turn of the year. 3 times a year all your men are to appear before the Lord Adonai, the God of Israel. For I am going to expel nations ahead of you and expand your territory, and no one will even covet your land when you go up to appear before Adonai your God 3 times a year. In other words, this coming before Adonai is a celebration of the produce, to give thanks for all the blessings of the land, for what he has done for us, how he gave us all this grain and fruits and vegetables and peace. He gave us this wonderful land. And the same instructions, you are not to offer the blood of my sacrifice with leavened bread, no chametz. The sacrifice of the feast of Pesach is not to be left until morning. You are to bring the best first fruits of your land into the house of Adonai your God. Give him glory. He is the one that gave you. He is the God of heaven and earth. He created everything. Give him the glory. He is the one that gives us the produce. And then he goes, you are not to boil a kid in its mother's milk. Well, again, same commandment. Interesting, right? The context. We are going to give thanks for the blessing of the produce, the blessing of the land, the blessing of the harvest, and it tells us not to engage in these 3 things. No blood, no leavened bread, don't leave it until morning, do not cook a kid in its mother's milk. Why? Let's read one more passage. Deuteronomy, the book of Devarim, chapter 14. You are the people of Adonai your God, talking to the people of Israel. You are not to gash yourselves or shave the hair above your foreheads in mourning for the dead, because you are a people set apart as holy for Adonai your God. Adonai your God has chosen you to be his own unique treasure out of all the peoples on the face of the earth. Wow. Praise Papa. Look, don't be hating and don't be jealous. The Lord chose Israel not because they were any better, just because he chose to choose them. And listen to what he says. You are the people of Adonai. Don't be mourning for the dead, because you don't die. The pagans die. You don't die, because the Lord is the resurrection. He puts to death and maketh alive. So, in other words, they didn't have the full revelation yet, but he told them, don't worry, I'm the living God. You're not gonna die. You go to sleep and I'll wake you up at the resurrection and you will be with me forever. So that's why in Israel, you're not supposed to mourn like the pagans do. Don't go gashing yourself and cutting yourself and tattooing pictures of the dead, all that pagan practices that they did. Israel is a people holy, set apart for Adonai. Worship the living God. Don't be worshipping all kind of pagans and man-made idols and statues and all kind of stuff. And then he goes into the dietary laws. You're not to eat anything disgusting, anything unclean. Here's the animals you eat: ox, sheep, goat, deer, gazelle, roebuck, ibex, antelope, everything kosher. Right? And then he goes, well, don't eat the pig. The pig is unclean for you. Stay away from the pigs, for all of you Christians. And he continues, out of anything in the water, anything that has fins and scales. But whatever does not have fins and scales, do not eat. It is unclean. You can eat any clean birds, but those birds do not eat. and all of those swarming creatures. This okay, this not okay. And then he goes, you are not to eat any animal that dies naturally, although you may let a stranger staying with you eat it or sell it to a foreigner. It's like, don't eat anything that dies on its own because it's not holy. You don't know what killed it. Could be infectious diseases. But you can give it to the stranger because they're not holy. You are. In other words, people that are not a part of the covenant don't have to keep it. It does not apply to you. So when the Christians say it does not apply to us, well, they're kind of right because they're not under the covenant. However, that also means you're not saved because the salvation is a part of the covenant. So if you want to be saved, you have to be grafted into the covenant, which means you ought to be clean and holy. It says so very clearly even in the New Testament, the letters of Peter. Holy nation, holy people for God. How can you be holy when you eat unholy? That's a contradiction. So he says, because you are a holy people for Adonai your God. And then he adds this verse. You are not to boil a kid in its mother's milk. So what is the context here? The context in this chapter is holiness. Don't do what the pagans do, because you're a treasured possession for Adonai. Don't do all these unclean things. Don't engage in unholy rituals. Don't, gash yourself for the dead. Don't eat those unclean things. Give it to the foreigners. Let them do it. Not you. You're holy. So think about it. It's all in the same context pretty much. It tells them how to worship Adonai, to be thankful for the produce, and then it tells them, don't do this pagan thing. Now, to really put it together and get an understanding on what it actually means though, we have to go to one more place, and that would be Hosea chapter 2. You might say Hosea, but his name was Hosea. And you will see why we are reading chapter 2. And we start at verse 4, which would be verse 2 in the English Bibles. Rebuke your mother, rebuke her, for she is not my wife and I am not her husband. She's talking about Israel. She must remove her whoring from her face and her adulteries from between her breasts. Very harsh words. He's not talking about physical, but about spiritual whoring. Forsaking Adonai, which is the husband of Israel, and whoring with these pagan deities. Otherwise I will strip her naked and place her as she was the day she was born, make her like a desert, place her like a dry land and kill her with thirst. I will have no pity on her children, for they are children of whoring. Their mother prostituted herself. She who conceived them behaved shamelessly. She said, I will pursue my lovers who give me, listen to this, my food and water, wool, flax, olive oil and wine. What is being said here? Israel, instead of giving God the glory, Adonai, go and worship these non-gods and give them the glory for the produce and the water and the flax and the wool and the olive oil and the wine. So you forget Adonai who does it and you give the glory to a non-God. Remember, the Lord said, I am a jealous God. You gotta be careful. So he said, therefore I will block her way with thorns and put up a hedge so she can't find her path. She will pursue her lovers, but not catch them. She will seek them, but won't find them. Then she will say, I will go and return to my first husband, because things were better for me then than they are now. You're not really repentant. You just realized you're really bad off now, so you want to go back to how things were. And then, this is the key verse here, listen to this. For she does not know it was I who gave her the grain, the wine, and the oil. I who increased her silver and gold, which they used for Baal. Ah, there you go. There you go. What is this Baal thing? If you know any history about the land and the people who lived in the land, remember the Canaanites. It was called the land of Canaan. It was the Knaanim who lived there, who partook in all kind of pagan worship, ritualistic serving of pagan gods, the Baal, the Asherah poles, the fertility goddesses, and the nature gods. Baal was a nature god. They gave credit to the cycle of the earth, like a spring god, like they do now. It's called Easter. What is Easter? It has nothing to do with the resurrection. What do eggs and bunnies have to do with it? Nothing. Eggs represent life. That's why they color them, because that originated in a practice of dipping eggs in blood for a fertility practice. And the bunny, well, bunnies, they reproduce very quickly. So it was a fertility practice, pagan worship. So now it's talking about the people of Israel doing these things. Instead of realizing and recognizing it is Adonai who gave us life, they give glory to this Baal thing. So he goes, I will take back my grain at harvest time, and my wine in its season. I will snatch away my wool and flax, given to cover her naked body. Now I will uncover her shame while her lovers watch, those idols, and no one will save her from me. I will end her happiness, her festivals, Rosh Chodesh, which is the new moon feast, and Shabbats, all of the Sabbath celebration, and all her designated times. I will ravage her vines and fig trees, of which she says, These are my wages that my lovers have given me. No, those are the gifts that Adonai has given you, foolish woman. But I will turn them into a forest, and wild animals will eat them. I will punish her for offering incense on the feast days of the Baalim, when she decked herself with her earrings and jewels, pursuing her lovers and forgetting me, says Adonai. Now listen, that is the key. If you want to understand why he told Israel not to cook a kid in its mother's milk, well, guess what? That was a pagan practice of fertility and increase for the harvest. It was a pagan worship. Like he just said, you're bringing up incense for the Baalim, you're doing all these things, you're sacrificing your children to try to please angry idols that do not exist. The Canaanites had this practice. You cook a kid, a child, in its mother's milk as a sacrifice to appease the gods to get a blessing for the harvest. The milk that is supposed to give life now is used for death. And the Lord said, This is not what I do. This is not what I require. I am the Lord your God, and here's what you ought to do to get a blessing. I am the one who blesses you. I am the one who's giving you the harvest for all of your fruits and vegetables and grain and everything else that the Lord has blessed Israel with. And he said, if you want a blessing, here's what you ought to do. Come and do this and do that. Be holy, be righteous. Seek justice, have mercy. Walk humbly with your God, as he said in Micah 6 verse 8. Don't engage in these pagan rituals trying to appease pagan gods. That's not what the Lord is into. So that really sums it up into understanding why he's giving us this strange command. Remember, the people just came out of Egypt, entering into a foreign land with a bunch of pagan people. There was no such thing as secular back then. Everybody believed in some god. They all worshipped pagan gods, which is why the Lord chose Israel as a tithe out of all the nations to be the ones who serve him, to be an example for the rest of the nations who the living God is and what does he require of us. Quite simple to understand. Has nothing to do with any dietary laws as far as eating meat with milk, but has everything to do with pagan worship. And that's just common sense. It's not that complicated to understand. I mean, think about it, Cook a kid in its mother's milk. Well, first off, chickens don't even have milk. So why can't you eat chicken and cheese? Either way you flip it and fold it and stretch it, you can never cook a chicken in its mother's milk because they don't have milk. And a cheeseburger, well, if you use goat's cheese with beef, you still can't cook it in its mother's milk, and you're not even cooking it. You're roasting it, and it's cheese. It's already been fermented from somewhere else from another time. But that is not even the point, because they took the whole animal as a whole and cooked it as an offering, as a sacrifice, which he told them not to do. That was a pagan offering. The Lord has his ways of doing things. You can read it all throughout the book of Vayikra in the beginning. the Ola offering, which is the burnt offering, how to do it, how to present it. The sin offering, the guilt offering. Each offering has its purpose and has its method. Those are the ways that he chose. Cooking a kid in its mother's milk was a pagan form of worship for another deity that is not God. So you can see how it's not that complicated to understand. You just have to be willing. You just have to have the heart to understand, to want to care, and not follow traditions blindly, which most do. And it all comes back to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your might, all your being. Because if you actually did, you would have no problem obeying his commandments. But as we see with most people, they're more faithful to their rabbis, their teachers, their traditions. Well, we've been doing that for thousands of years. Yes, you have, but that's not the right thing to do. You've been led astray for thousands of years. And now it is so ingrained in you, you're not even willing to listen because, who am I? Just some guy that tells you something? Well, I'm a messenger of the Lord, but do you care? No. Because your tradition is your God. And that comes back to the second commandment. You shall have no other gods before me. But the teachers of traditions have become your gods. And so many Jews get their righteousness, they don't really get their righteousness, but their sense of righteousness by keeping allegedly kosher, separating meat and dairy, waiting 6 hours between eating meat and drinking milk or cheese is 6 hours. What is this nonsense? You have a completely different set of silverware, different sets of plates, different sets of pans and pots, different sets of cups, different sets of cutting boards, different sets of everything. You have basically 2 different kitchens. One for meat, one for dairy. Whoa, you're crazy. You think Israel had budget for all of this? You think Moshe in the desert could afford to have 2 different kitchens, one for meat and one for dairy? Where do you get this from? It doesn't even make sense. The Lord is practical. He gave us practical teachings. The yoke of God is not heavy. It doesn't overburden us with these nonsense commandments. That's what people do. Because religion is the replacement of God, so that the rabbis will be in the seat of God, having full control and authority over the people. You have to be very careful. Don't get your false sense of righteousness because of that. So many people in Israel, they separate meat and dairy, but they sleep around with their boyfriends and their girlfriends. They live together, they're not married. They do all kind of secular things, right? They violate Shabbat, but I don't eat cheeseburgers and chicken parmesan. That's not kosher. Well, whatever. That's not what's gonna save you. The Lord does not care about you obeying the rabbis. He cared about you obeying His word. As He said in Devarim, do everything I have told you to do. Do not add to it, nor subtract from it. Word for word. Do not steer to the right, nor steer to the left. Then you will be blessed. Then you will succeed wherever you go. Then you will have a plentiful harvest. You don't need to worship pagan gods and boil a kid in its mother's milk. That's not what the Lord is into. Not complicated to understand. So I hope this helps. Praise Papa.